arigato, Mr. Roboto.
Domo arigato, geek to me radio, da 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 da. Domo arigato, geek to me radio, da 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 da.
Welcome, 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 girls and boys, geeks and nerds, to a brand new edition of Geek to Me Radio. Today, we are joined by Marvel writer, editor, penciler, Bob Budiansky, talking all about his time at Marvel Comics, specifically working on the iconic Transformers series from Marvel, Sleepwalker creation, and more. Stand by.
We're talking TV, comics and movies, and video games. And if you don't know Star Trek from Star Wars, we'll try to explain. There are 12 doctors, 4 Hogwarts houses, 1 ring rules them all. To be the greatest Pokemon master, you must catch them all. You must catch them all. Try to catch them all. Gotta catch them all. Gotta catch them all.
And if you're driving around St. Louis right now, hearing this on 105.3 FM and 1380 AM, thank you for finding us and listening. If you're hearing us out there in the world, streaming us online, we appreciate your doing that. And of course, if you're hearing us after the fact in the podcast form on Google Play, iTunes, SoundCloud, Podomatic, we appreciate your finding us and subscribing and listening there as well. We have a jam-packed show today. This show, as always, brought to you by DiscoverSTCharles.com. Just last night, I took my little dog Grimlock for a walk along historic Main Street, and there's not a bad time to be down there. It's gorgeous. The weather was wonderful. We went into Kilwins and had ice cream. Obviously not the dog, because dairy's bad for dogs. It was just me. I had toasted coconut and sea salt chocolate caramel ice cream from Kilwins. We walked along there, went into a couple of shops. They're dog-friendly shops, so if you're a dog person, bring your dog with you, and most shops, just check with them. They'll let the dog in. They can walk around. He tried to purchase something. I took my Amex card away from him, though, so he's not allowed to do things like that. But it's really a fun place to go. If you're a history buff, if you're a foodie, if you love Missouri wine, they're putting in a brand new Salt and Smoke right there where the winery of the Little Hills used to be. That's going to be going in and opening up very soon. So if you're a barbecue fan, that's got to be a destination for you. The Sesquicentennial is coming up, the 250th anniversary. Huge goings-on for that. You can find out about all this from the website. DiscoverSTCharles.com is where you want to go. Plan your trip. If you're from out of town, come stay a weekend. You'll love it and might not want to leave. And there are homes for sale. That can be arranged too. But definitely check out the website. If nothing else, DiscoverSTCharles.com. We're very proud to have them as the premier sponsor of Geek to Me Radio. I'm very excited about this next guest. Like I said, I'm an 80s junkie. He created one of my favorite Marvel comic characters in Sleepwalker. He wrote and penciled issues of Transformers and more. And we'll get into all that right now. We're joined now by Bob Budiansky, talking about his amazing career working for Marvel Comics as a writer and illustrator. Bob, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me. A huge fan. I grew up with all of your stuff from the time you started on Transformers all the way up to creating Sleepwalker, which is one of those 90s characters that came out with Darkhawk and the New Warriors that I loved so much. Fantastic part of my childhood, so thank you for that.
Oh, well, I'm happy I was able to contribute, hopefully in a positive way, to your childhood, and I had a ball doing all that work. It was great.
So it was a good block of time for you at Marvel Comics. I recently, you were featured in the Toys That Made Us for their Transformers block episode that they did. That must have been fun, kind of going back and revisiting that, I would assume. Oh, yeah. It was
a really nice experience, being interviewed, grilled, I should say, and they really dug down deep. They even asked me to come up with a photograph of what I looked like around the time that I was working on the Transformers in the 1980s, and they, as a result of that one little photo I found, they hired an actor to play me in similar clothing from back then. So it was a fun experience. Did you get final approval on the actor? It's like, no, he's too tall, no, he's too short. Were you able to help him with that? I was lobbying for Tom Hanks, but he wasn't available. He's so busy these days. I'm not sure what that guy's problem is. Yeah, I guess.
So, I mean, as far as Transformers and Marvel Comics, you basically are to Transformers what Larry Hama was to G.I. Joe. They did this 3-prong attack where they had a comic book series launched with a cartoon, launched with a toy line for Hasbro and Marvel, and it was extremely successful with both lines. And you were basically, from what I understand, according to what's out there in the internet and, of course, what they mentioned in the Toys That Made Us, you came up with the names of 90% of the Transformer characters in just a weekend?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, like there were 26 characters initially, and different. Another editor from Marvel had already taken a crack at it, and the editor-in-chief at the time, Jim Shooter, who, by the way, should get a lot of credit for the Transformers as well. Anyway, Jim Shooter, for whatever reason, didn't like what the other editor had turned in, so he turned to me eventually, and I believe 2 names were preserved from the original work that was done by the other editor, and he came to me. I was a staff editor at the time at Marvel, and he asked me to give it a whirl, and so over a long weekend, like maybe a 3-day period, right before Thanksgiving of 1983, I had to come up with all of these profiles for all these characters as well as their names, and it worked out pretty well. Jim Shooter approved it, and then he turned it over to Hasbro, and they were generally happy with everything I did, and that's how I got my start.
And we actually had Jim Shooter on the air, probably about 6 or 7 months ago, and he mentioned the Transformers working on that was probably one of the highlights of what he did there while he was at Marvel. That and Secret Wars, he was very proud of both of those. But the characters, talk a little bit about when you're sitting there this weekend before Thanksgiving, you're going through trying to brainstorm. What did you have to go off of? Obviously, some sketches. Did they send you some of the Dial-A-Clone and Microman toys? What were you working off of for your inspiration for this?
Yeah, initially they had, I think, all the toys, because all the original Transformers, the initial line of Transformers, were basically the original Japanese toys that Hasbro licensed, or whatever deal they made with Takara and Bandai toy companies. Those were the toys that they used to create the original 26 Transformers, and they just repainted them and rebranded them as Transformers. So they just gave me the toys. I don't think that, it's been a while, but I don't. Maybe they gave me a couple of drawings of a couple of them, but I frankly don't remember that. So I just looked at the toys. I knew what they were supposed to transform into, from a robot into a jet, or a robot into a car, whatever it was. And that was my launching pad. That was the information I was given.
Were there any that you were kind of surprised that they went ahead and went with? Like at the end of this weekend, come Sunday evening, you're like, oh, let's just call this one Laserbeak, or were you kind of surprised by any that they kept?
Well, I mean, no, I don't think I was surprised. I was trying to give them my best attempt at coming up with a name that I thought would be would represent the character. If it was a bad guy character, I was trying to come up with a name that had some kind of negative connotation or negative vibe. If it was a good guy character, I was trying to do the opposite and come up with something that was more positive sounding, and something that represented the profile that I was playing with. If I was, like, I think one of the Autobots was an ambulance, I wanted to come up with something that has a medical connotation. So I mean, I was just jumbling words in my head. I was a big crossword puzzle fan. I still am. So I was pretty literate as far as playing with words go. So that really, I think, was a great help. I thank the Sunday New York Times for that. Yeah.
All that crossword puzzle work paid off.
Yes. Yeah. Also, little known fact: my major in college was civil engineering, which I never actually went into as a career. So, but the one good thing about being a civil engineering major was I was able to pull a lot of pseudoscience jargon out of the stuff that I learned in my engineering classes and apply it to the Transformers. So I was able to come up with some words and some profile information that made me sound more technically oriented than maybe I really was, but I did have that in my background.
See, I'm learning all sorts of stuff. That's why I love having the creators like you on the show. That's brilliant.
Yeah, in fact, one of my early meetings with Hasbro probably after me coming up with a few dozen of their character names and profiles after a couple of toy lines had rolled out. No pun intended. I was at a meeting and one of the product managers said, "Were you ever in the military?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, because you come up with all this scientific military kind of jargon." And I said, "Well, I was a civil engineering major, which is what really helped me come up with some of these words." So so I got something out of my major.
So when you were going through, obviously it was just supposed to be a 4-issue limited series, went on to do 80 issues. With that run and you doing the majority of it, both penciling and writing on the comic.
No. Let me correct you. No, I did very little penciling.
Oh, okay.
Very little. Yeah, I edited the first 4 issues, and then the next 50 issues, like issues 5 through 55, 51 issues actually. 51 issues. I wrote almost all of them. I only penciled a little bit of the last issue, and I penciled several covers. I also did layouts for multiple covers that went to other artists to do the final product.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me, because had I lived my life in blissful ignorance this whole time, that would not serve me well. So I appreciate that.
No, I want to give, I had great artists I worked with, like Don Perlin and Herb Trimpe and Jose Delbo. They're the guys who actually produced the artwork for the books that I wrote.
One of my very favorite possessions, I met Jose Delbo at a Comic-Con in Denver 2 summers ago, and I had one of those blank Transformers versus G.I. Joe covers, and I had him, and I talked to Larry Hama ahead of time, and they teamed up. I had Larry Hama draw Flint on one half of the cover, and Jose Delbo drew Grimlock in his dinosaur form on the other cover, and I love it. It's my favorite thing. I get to meet to take a picture with it, and it's Jose Delbo's art on that leaves an indelible impression in my mind.
Yeah, and I'm sure I left an indelible impression in Jose's mind, because he had to draw like a dozen robots, sometimes a lot more every issue, and come up with look at all the reference that was provided to him, and come up with renderings of these characters that had to match the reference. I'm sure it was a nightmare.
He was very kind. I said, "Can you draw Grimlock?" He looks at me, he kind of thinks for me, he goes, "Which one was Grimlock?" I said, "That's the big Tyrannosaurus Rex." "Oh, okay, yeah." And he pulled up his phone and kind of went through and found a picture. He's, "Yeah, I can do that." But actually, I named my dog Grimlock after my very favorite Transformer.
Well, okay, I'll take credit for that, since I did come up with the name for Grimlock.
And obviously, Ravage, Ratchet, there were so many. Did you have, when you're going through them, did you have a favorite at the time? Do you remember?
In terms of character or name?
Character or a name that you were most proud of coming up with, either way. And we're going to get Bob's answer to that question right after this. Stand by.
Land and air. G.I. Joe! G.I. Joe is there!
Hey, hi, listeners. This is Greg Berger.
Meet Grimlock, Dinobot leader from Transformers.
And guess what? You're listening to Geek to Me Radio.
Transformers, for the race behind.
Welcome back. This segment brought to you by Marcus Theaters. MarcusTheaters.com is that website. You can get your tickets for Avengers Endgame. This movie is going to blow the doors off theaters. And if you're going to blow the doors off it, you might as well be in a comfy chair while you blow those doors off the sides. Sit in Marcus Theaters. It's just such a great environment to see movies with their technology. They've updated all the theaters here in St. Louis area. We're so glad that Marcus Theaters has come in and made it a movie-going experience. And an experience is the best way to describe it. With their Ultra DLX screens, you can see these movies in their IMAX 3D, the big comfy chairs with heated seats, great concessions, great food, and obviously fantastic movies. If you're a movie buff, you got to go see your films at a Marcus Theaters. 11 states in which you can find Marcus Theaters. Go to the website, marcustheaters.com. You can buy your tickets there, check out the movie reviews, get gift cards. They're a perfect gift for somebody. If you've got graduations coming up, if you've got a birthday coming up, Mother's Day, give the gift of cinema. Buy a Marcus Theaters gift card. And, of course, be a member of their rewards program. You get all sorts of perks and benefits from that. Check them out, marcustheaters.com. Right before we went to break, we were talking with Bob Budiansky about his work on the iconic 80s Transformers series from Marvel Comics. We asked him what his favorite Transformer was.
In terms of character or name?
Character or a name that you were most proud of coming up with, either way.
Well, I'll start with the name. I think my favorite name of all the names they came up with was Megatron.
Yeah.
Just has that ring to it.
It does.
You know? And I thought that worked really well. As you could imagine, I had to submit all the names to Hasbro for their approval. And initially, Hasbro, and this is early on in my involvement with Transformers, initially Hasbro turned down the name Megatron. And now I understood very, very fully that this was their product. They're in charge. I'm the new kid on the block here. And if they want to turn something down, that's certainly their privilege. But I felt Megatron had such a good sound to it, so I actually fought for it a little bit. And I said, what's the problem with Megatron? And they said, well, it sounds a little, the product manager said, sounds a little too scary. And I pointed out to her that, well, he is the head of the bad guys. He should sound a little scary. So that was a convincing enough argument to keep Megatron's name intact. And so here we are all these years later still talking about Megatron.
And he does transform into a Walther P-38, which can be scary as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure, I believe more recently they've had him transform into something that's more politically correct, I think.
Yeah, now he's a tank, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, but back then you could transform into a gun and it would be okay to sell it as a kid's toy.
Right. The 80s.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, he was a nasty guy, so Megatron just had a good ring to it, so in my head. And back then, mega did not mean how many bytes your computer held.
Right.
But it had the connotation of nuclear bombs because nuclear bombs were measured in megatons. So Megatron was had that right ring to it, which is why I guess people at Hasbro found it so scary. As far as character, the character that I enjoyed writing the most was Blaster. I just wrote some of my better stories featuring Blaster, and so I have a particular kinship toward that character.
Yeah, Blaster and Goldbug taking on the Mechanic, and I think it was like issue 26 or 27, where it's just the two of them against that guy with all of Ratchet's power tools. That was a great issue.
Well, thank you. Yes, yeah, that was fun writing that character.
And this was, like I said, in the heyday of the 80s, which Transformers is such a seminal product of any person who grew up in the 80s, with Marvel Productions working on that with Hasbro and Sunbow for the cartoon. Were you in on some of the production meetings for the cartoon as well? Did you interact with the voice actors? What was your experience like regarding the cartoon itself?
Not as much as you might hope. Basically, I think I was in one meeting with Sunbow Productions early on, and it was just sort of like a meet and greet. So basically, I came up with what I was tasked to do, which was the names and the character profiles as Hasbro introduced one line after another line after another line of Transformers. I would produce that work. I would hand it over to Hasbro. They would eventually approve what I turned in. If they asked for changes, I'd make changes, and then they just sent all that stuff over to Sunbow Productions. And what Sunbow Productions did with it after that, I have no idea. They didn't consult me. I didn't ask to be consulted, frankly. They have their own. I had my own work to do. I didn't want to get pulled into their work. And
right.
I'm sure they really didn't want to pull some outsider like me into what they were doing. So we really didn't we really didn't correspond at all. Hasbro was basically just the traffic manager of turning my stuff over to them. Yeah.
And all these years, you even came back and revisited the anniversary issue for Transformers the movie. Was there any feelings about coming back and revisiting this work that you'd been such an integral part of?
Well, I've been kind of pulled back into revisiting my work. I had pretty much, as you might imagine, I had moved on to other projects after Transformers.
Sure.
While working at Marvel, and then I was no longer working at Marvel, and I was working elsewhere and doing other things. So I wasn't really focusing on the work I had done back in the second half of the 1980s on Transformers for many, many years. And then within the last maybe 15 years, I've been invited to conventions. I've been interviewed by, different people like yourself. And I've been forced to revisit all of the stuff that I had pretty much, put into the the file cabinet in my memory, and close the door, close the drawer there, and not really paid much attention to. So I'm much more familiar now with my work than I was maybe 15 years ago because I hadn't really spent much time thinking about it. And people ask me questions, so I have answers, maybe not for every question, but for many of the questions, right at the tip of my tongue, because I've gone through this. I've done these memory exercises and looked at the old comic books and checked out all the stuff over and over again. So I have a pretty good sense of what I did back then.
We just talked to Keith Giffen at Planet Comic-Con this past weekend, and he was saying that if you came to his house, you would never know he wrote comics because he doesn't have a single comic in his house. Do you still keep your old work? Do you have comics around the house? Do you have Transformers toys still up on your shelves?
I do have comic books. They're boxed away. They're not lying in piles around the house. I don't do that. I never featured action figures or toys or whatever of the work I did. And put them on shelves and in display cases. I never was into that. So you would come into my house. You'd have to look pretty hard to figure out it had anything to do with comic books. The evidence is there, but mostly it's hidden away in closets.
Gotcha. So it doesn't look anything like my house then. I'll keep that in mind.
Well, I try, when I speak to fans I go to comic book conventions and I'm on panels, and I try to make the distinction as gentle as possible that when they were growing up reading the Transformers and maybe some of the other work I did at Marvel, they were looking at it from a fan's point of view. I was looking at it from a work point of view. So although I enjoyed the work immensely and I did the best job I could, it was a job.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
I wasn't playing with the toys. I wasn't, reading the comic books over and over and over again. I was just, okay, I finished issue 22, now on to issue 23. That was how I looked at it.
That makes a good deal of sense. And talking about your work at Marvel, you worked with some great writers as well. Your work on Ghost Rider, you worked with Roger Stern and J.M. DeMatteis, who is very just an incredible writer. How was your experience working on Ghost Rider? And then you went from Ghost Rider to Prince Namor, also with J.M. DeMatteis. So I assume the two of you have a really good working relationship.
Yes, that is absolutely true. So when I first got on Ghost Rider, I was working with Roger Stern. He was a terrific writer, and we were asked to not completely, but give like a soft reboot to Ghost Rider, which Roger did with the first issue that I drew, and then we were able to take off from there. And he stayed on for several issues, and then if I might correct your pronunciation, excuse me, Mark DeMatteis, or J.M. DeMatteis, he came aboard. And the big difference there for me was that he was happy to co-plot the stories with me. So I got involved with actually helping him, structure the plots, and that was great. We had a great working relationship. And then after Ghost Rider went away, we went on to a 4-issue Submariner limited series. And I still consider Mark a real good friend. We get together at conventions every so often if our paths cross, and he's a great guy and a tremendous talent. Yeah.
And you've been so involved with this editing, the Clone Saga, which it seems like it's been getting more and more love lately. Because I used to talk to people and was like, "Oh, this was a mess." But the more I talk to people now, and I'm not sure if it's through the lens of nostalgia, but a lot of people I talk to now at conventions are like, "I love the Scarlet Spider. That whole Spider clone thing was great," which I always dug. That must have been, I would assume, continuity-wise, quite a lot for you to keep track of as an editor. But I would think also very cool to be revisiting this. It happened in Amazing Spider-Man issues 148 through 150, coming back now and kind of revisiting that saga. What can you talk a little bit about what that was like working on those books during that time? All right, and we'll get Bob's answer to what that was like working on the Clone Saga, the infamous Clone Saga from Amazing Spider-Man, right after this. Stand by.
This is Alan Oppenheimer, the voice of Skeletor, and you're listening to Geek to Me.
Welcome back. Before we went to break, we were talking with Bob Budiansky for the whole hour, and we'd asked him about his time, his impressions of how he felt working on the infamous Spider-Man Clone Saga of the 90s.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, you're telling me something I'm not aware of. I didn't realize that it's being revisited or reconsidered, and currently I'm kind of out of the loop. But back then, so I was brought in as the Spider-Man editor-in-chief. Marvel had they had kind of decentralized. They took the editor-in-chief job and made it into 5 jobs, and so I was given the Spider-Man books. And I walked in the middle of this Clone Saga. It was already well underway. I was working with a lot of veteran writers and people that had been working on this series for a while and knew where it was going. So I was kind of like jumping on a moving train. I felt there wasn't much I could do to stop it. I wasn't thrilled with where it was going, but it had to go there. And I'll tell you why it had to go there. So obviously the ultimate reveal of that Clone Saga was that the Peter Parker that we thought we had known for the last couple of decades was actually the clone, and the clone was actually Peter Parker. And the clone had been wandering, all over the country for years, and now he's back, and it turns out he's the real guy. And we got a lot of fan backlash from that, and that's kind of what I was somewhat afraid would happen. Kind of pulling the rug out from under all these long-term fans. But anyway, like I said, we were already well underway when I walked into this Spider-Man Clone Saga, and the reason it had to end that way, or at least back then, and it didn't really end that way, but for that storyline it ended that way, was because a decision had been made that Peter Parker and Mary Jane were going to become parents, and then a decision had been made. Again, this is before I got aboard. That doesn't work because if you make Peter Parker a father, you're removing him even one more step from the audience for Spider-Man. They're not buying Spider-Man as Peter Parker daddy. They're buying Spider-Man as Peter Parker, young single male, or actually by that time he was married male, which was again one step removed from the core audience. So once it was figured out that we've kind of dug this hole, we meaning the creative staff on Spider-Man, the editorial team and the writers, they dug this hole of Peter Parker ultimately becoming a dad. The solution was, we'll make it so that he's not the real Peter Parker, he's a clone. Okay, so that's what was driving the Clone Saga.
Gotcha.
That decision to make him a dad. And I think it was, in retrospect, I felt like, I was given lemons, and I'll do my best to make lemonade out of it.
Right.
That was my overarching goal, was to do the best I can with this Clone Saga, and hopefully the fans will accept it. And the fans did not accept it. So, and I don't blame them.
But as I said, it seems like the people who I've talked to lately have shown it more love. So I'm not sure if that's that lens of nostalgia or just people remembering it differently. But I've talked to people lately, and they do enjoy it. They tell me, "Oh yeah, I did like that as well." So
we had a lot of fun with it, and we got a lot of sales with it. So it did create a lot of it. It did draw a lot of attention. People. This is the time when Marvel was going through a lot. It was imploding. Sales were dropping like a rock. But Spider-Man sales were good, so we were doing something right. And myself and the editor and the creative team, we were having a lot of fun with it. We were coming up with all sorts of permutations and things that that spun off of the Clone Saga. So we were trying to, like you said, the Scarlet Spider and so on. Like we were trying to have as much fun. There was 1 month or maybe 2 months where we renumbered all the issues. We changed the names of all the issues. There was no longer Spider-Man. It was I think it was Scarlet Spider, I think.
Yeah, Amazing Scarlet Spider, Spectacular. Yeah. I've still got those issues.
So we did, we had fun with it. We were trying to have fun with it, and hopefully the fans are having fun too. But at the same time, the ultimate reveal was, I think, hard for a lot of people to swallow.
But they always say you're not doing something right if you're not making people angry. So I guess you guys were doing something right after all.
I don't know if angry and comic book sales go hand in hand ultimately. I think if you upset your fans, people vote with their wallet. So if you, at least in sales of comics. So if people are angry, they're just going to say, I've had enough of this. I'm going to spend my money somewhere else. So you're taking a chance if you make them too angry. I think you can upset people up to a point, but you have to allow them an opportunity to come back on board. And the decision to make back then Peter Parker the clone it seemed like it was just like this was a one-way door. You know, he starts as Peter Parker, he ends up as a clone. That's it. We're not giving the fans a chance to get back on board. And then as soon as we went through that, I said, look, we got to figure out a way to change it back, and we started dropping clues. Unfortunately, I didn't stay at Marvel long enough to see it to its fruition, where we did have a plan to bring things back to the status quo.
Yeah, it's probably that Clone Saga is probably my favorite thing that Spider-Man has done. And then when Dan Slott did Superior Spider-Man a couple of years back, that was another one of those. Some fans got really upset they killed Peter Parker off, and Otto Octavius is the new Spider-Man, but that book sold like crazy. So it's like, I'm not sure, there's a little bit about people are angry, but they keep wanting to pay to see what's happening, how it's going to resolve itself.
Yeah, now I'm aware of that storyline. I never read it, but I'm assuming that they figured out a way to bring, Dan Slott figured out a way to bring Peter Parker back into the story as Spider-Man.
Right.
So, otherwise it wouldn't make sense for Otto Octavius to be Spider-Man forever. So he gave the chance, even though he may have upset some fans, he gave them an opportunity to get back on board and, get back to the status quo again. That's what you got, and that's what we back in the 1990s were. We meaning myself, my editors, and the writers. That's what we were looking to do to get it back to a status quo that the fans could accept. And like I said, I wasn't there long enough to see how that worked itself out.
And you were also editing on Daredevil, Fantastic Four. You've had such a hand in so many Marvel characters. Do you have a favorite Marvel character while we're talking about it? And we'll get his answer. Was it the Fantastic Four? Was it Daredevil? Who was it? We'll get Bob Budiansky's answer right after this. Stand by.
Sword of Omens, come to my hand. I, Lion-O, command it. Hi, this is Larry Kennedy, the voice of Lion-O, and you're listening to Geek to Me Radio.
And we're back. Right before we went to break, we were talking with Bob Budiansky, penciler, writer, editor for Marvel Comics, and asked him about all the books he's worked on. What was his favorite Marvel character?
Well, that's a good question. I guess overall my favorite is Spider-Man. So I was kind of happy when I was given the opportunity to run the Spider-Man books for the short time I was there, running it maybe about a year and a half. But I grew up, when I was growing up, actually my favorite Marvel book was the Fantastic Four. It was like the classic Stan Lee, Jack Kirby period. Those were just some wonderful issues when Galactus was introduced, and the Silver Surfer, and the Inhumans, and Black Panther. Every month there was something that was blowing your mind, And I was just at the right age to be buying them at that time.
And now that we're seeing all this come to fruition on the big screen, having all the work, like I said, with all these characters, you wrote for Avengers, you've penciled in Ghost Rider, you've done all these stuff, and now we're seeing all these people. How are you liking the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Are there any castings that you are particularly fond of that they've had up there?
I have to say, and I say this not as a fan, but as a longtime moviegoer. I love movies. I think I'm very critical of movies, whether good or bad. And I would say that the people behind the Marvel Studios are doing a phenomenal job. With hardly an exception, I think they've made solid, entertaining movies. And extremely creative, wonderful to look at. The castings are right on. I mean, it's hard for me to think about somebody who was miscast. I don't have enough praise for the people. Kevin Feige, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and and the people behind what's coming out of Marvel Studios. They just do a great job. They've created a blueprint that everybody else is trying to duplicate, and nobody's gotten close. Not yet, anyway. More power to them. They do. I love seeing Marvel Studios movies. I mean, some movies I like more than others, but I think they do a really good job. And they bring back what I enjoyed when I was a kid reading comic books. They make it fun to watch a superhero movie, just like it was fun to read a superhero comic when I was growing up in the 1960s reading comic books.
And, of course, we need to talk about Sleepwalker. This was one of those characters that came out in the 90s right alongside Darkhawk. When they relaunched the Guardians of the Galaxy's book, they had New Warriors coming out, that 90s heroes that were this brand new splash on the scene. Real quick before we talk about Sleepwalker, if they were to cast Sleepwalker / Rick Sheridan in the MCU, do you have a fan cast?
Well, they already have. I don't know if you're aware. There's a fan film of Sleepwalker that's just about completed. I just got the director / writer of it just texted me this afternoon saying he's hoping to premiere it at a convention in August, and he flew me down there about. I'm trying to think. I think in December 2017, he flew me down. He's based in Tampa. He flew me down to Tampa to do my Stan Lee cameo in the movie.
Nice, very cool.
So it's a live action movie with special effects, with real actors, with real camera people, with real sound people, with real wardrobe people. He himself is in that business of. I think he's more making like. Videos and commercials and industrial video products and things like that. So he has experience, and so it's already been cast.
That's amazing.
Now, yeah, it's almost done. If you go on Facebook and type in Sleepwalker, you'll see there's a Sleepwalker page dedicated to the movie.
For those of you listening right now, I'll find that link and I'll put it on our Twitter feed. That's really cool.
Yeah. The guy behind it, his name is Josh Noftz, Noftz, and. He's a super Sleepwalker fan, and he decided to make his own movie of Sleepwalker. And where it will take him, I do not know. I don't have the rights to tell him that he can do it. Obviously, Marvel owns the character, but I'm very impressed that he put all this into it.
That's really.
So as far as who I would cast in it, so like I said, I don't think I should say that because somebody's already been cast in it.
Right, that's true.
So I don't want to offend that person. I've met him. I actually had a scene with him. Okay. And actually, he's a legitimate actor. The guy I played opposite, who played Rick Sheridan, the human counterpart of Sleepwalker, he was in that movie Hidden Figures about the
astronauts.
NASA in the early 60s.
With Octavia Spencer,
he was in that movie. Yeah, I had seen, I had just been down in Tampa doing my scenes, and then a few weeks later, I'm watching this movie in the theater. I said, that guy looks familiar.
That's Rick Sheridan.
The guy I was doing my scenes with. Yeah, that was Rick Sheridan, yeah.
That's got to be so gratifying as a creator that so many people do love this character, and they've recently brought him back for the Infinity Wars crossover in Marvel, which you got to have a part of that. I assume every creator wants to leave behind a legacy, but to have this character that is so beloved, when you were creating him, did you have a semblance, an idea that it would become this cool, just fan-crazed character?
When I create something, whether it's Transformers or whether it's Sleepwalker, I'm just hoping I can do something for today that works for people who are looking at this comic book today. It's really hard, at least for me, to project 20, 30 years into the future and say there's going to be people are going to be loving this like they love Spider-Man or love Superman or whoever's been around for decades and decades. It's kind of, I think it's a little bit presumptuous to assume that might happen. And you can't think of it that way. My job as a writer is to just produce this issue of this book and do it in such a way that it will reach an audience and talk to an audience, and then I'll want to come back for the following issue. I'm looking for that following issue, not for the following, movie franchise 20 years
right.
from now. That's kind of beyond the scope of what I'm doing when I'm a writer of a comic book. But it's great that all these things that I was working on years ago still have currency today. It's really wonderful.
And I know I always love to ask creators directly because you see things on the internet and half of it I end up finding out once I talk to the creator, no, that's not true at all. They said that Marvel greenlit your idea for Sleepwalker in response to the traction that DC's Sandman had gotten. Is that true?
No.
Thank you. Thank you, Internet, for lying to me again.
I could tell you exactly how Sleepwalker got greenlit. Okay, so Marvel had a process called the New Project Committee, of which I was in charge, actually, at this time. But because Sleepwalker was my project, I could not vote on it, So anyway, people, creators would submit ideas, a treatment for a new book to the New Project Committee. I would pull together obviously myself and a couple of the other editors at the time to review their projects. And we would decide whether we thought that this would work or not. So the books that you mentioned, along with Sleepwalker, like specifically Darkhawk, I think New Warriors as well, came through the New Project Committee. Wasn't in response to anything other than we want new ideas, and we're encouraging people to submit new ideas for Marvel. And so Sleepwalker was just another one of that happened to be my idea, and I submitted it, and it went through the committee, and it eventually got kicked up to the editor-in-chief at the time, which was Tom DeFalco. And Tom liked it, and he asked me for some changes in it, and went through a couple of drafts, and then it got greenlit, and that was it.
With working with Brett Blevins on that, his art fit your narrative so well on that story. I've got the full run of Sleepwalker still bagged and boarded. I must have read over it at least 3 times. Is there a certain, I would think, shorthand between you and an artist you work on the series with that long, where they kind of, as they get your sketch or as they get your words, they've already got an idea of what they want in mind? How much collaboration? How often did you guys interact on Sleepwalker? And kind of tell me a little bit about the process between the two of you.
Okay. Well, I had worked with Brett as an editor, and he had done, I forget what he had done for me, but he had done some book for me. And I met him a couple times, and I admired his work tremendously. And so when Sleepwalker got greenlit, I said to the editor who was on it, I wasn't the editor of Sleepwalker, I was the writer. I went to my editor. I said, I suggest you ask Brett Blevins. He's my first choice. He'd be perfect for this. And unbelievably, I got my first choice. He was the guy I wanted, and he said yes. And he did the first 17 issues with maybe 1 or 2 villains in the middle of that. And, as far as us collaborating, I wrote to his strengths. I knew what he was able to do. Mm-hmm. So I came up with scenes that I knew he would enjoy drawing, that he would be able to expand upon. It was a while ago, so maybe we did have a conversation here and there where he suggested ideas and I incorporated them. But basically, I wanted to make it a fun experience for him to draw this, and it shows, because I think he really poured his imagination into every issue, and it made it look great.
And it's been such a blast talking with Bob Budiansky. Sleepwalker, anyone who's read Sleepwalker knows what a fantastic, underutilized character that is. We're going to come back in our last segment. We're going to wrap things up with Bob Budiansky, so stand by.
Silver heart, a rainbow in the
Hey, you guys, this is Raphael of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and after we've kicked Shredder's butt, we all get down the sewer and we listen to Geek to Me Radio. Turtle Power!
We're back, and we are wrapping things up with the guest we've had this entire hour. Huge fan of this man. He's contributed to my childhood through his pencils, through his writing, editing some of these iconic books that I read growing up, and we're wrapping things up now with Bob Budiansky. And we should mention if there are any conventions or anything like that coming up that you're going to be at where people want to meet you. I know I've got an original Sleepwalker promo poster that I would love to have you sign. How many conventions do you do a year, and what are some upcoming ones that people can find you at?
Well, it varies. So right now, I just did one, so that's history. I did one in Kentucky a couple weeks ago. I'll be doing one in Dallas at the end of the last weekend in June. And that's a comic book convention. And then I'll be doing one in a suburb of Toronto in the middle of July. That's a Transformers convention. And that's in Mississauga, but it says Toronto. But that's right outside Toronto. And that's all I have on my board right now. I don't, I do some conventions. I don't seek out conventions. They seek me out, and then I say yes or no, depending on all sorts of criteria, if I'm available and so on, and if I want to actually go to that place. So anyway, so I'm doing it. So usually I'll do between 4 and 8 conventions a year. But obviously it varies.
And with commissions, if people do want to reach out, is that through Facebook? Do you have the website they go to? How do people get in contact with you for that?
Well, many people have contacted me through Facebook, so probably that's the best way. I'm not going to obviously hand out my phone number or email over the air, but you can contact me if there's any listeners out there who are interested in getting a commission from me. You can contact me through Facebook. I've done many commissions that way.
Bob Budiansky, again, I can't thank you enough for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned things I didn't know, and that's always great. Any other time, if you ever want to be nostalgic, feel free to hit me up. We'd love to have you on air again. Oh, anytime you have more questions, let me know, okay? It's been a lot of fun. I'm glad we had this conversation. Me too. Thanks very much for your time today. No, you're more than welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye. That's going to wrap it up. I can't tell you what a thrill it was to talk to Bob Budiansky. I've been a huge fan of his, and it was great that I was able to get him. We talked about more stuff that I did not have time to air because the interview went so well, and we've got a time constraint. My Patreon subscribers will get that extra bit of interview. So if you're on Patreon, look for Geek to Me Radio, subscribe there, and help support the show and get extra content. Until next week, my friends.
It's not in the way you watch iZombie. It's not in the way you watch The Flash. It's not in the way you love Scotty Young Arts. It's not in the way you play Mario Kart. It's not in the way you look when you make Game of Thrones references. That's our show. This is Geek to Me Radio. That's our show. This is Geek to Me Radio.
Thank you, Teletran 1. Good night.